delighted that you've all come. I think the topic tonight is cousins by the dozen.
We came out of 13 children, and I think we probably have a mailing list of 160 or so, and anticipated attendance, 140 people. So it's widespread, although the name Marrus is a disappearing name. We seem to be replaced by a whole variety of names, and out of the 140 that are attending this event over the weekend, I think Judy and I counted there were somewhat fewer than 25 Marruses. So it's a name which I think has had a period in time. I don't know how long it's going to exist.
It's really incredible.
Yeah. It's pretty amazing,
Don't
huh?
ask me to tell you how. I can't.
Elliot, and it's spelled Shostakovsky, Shostakovsky, and Yetta Powell Shostakovsky were both born and married in Russia near the Polish border.
That's fine.
There were 9 sons born in Russia: Samuel, Barney, Ike, Henry, Louis, Ben, Dave, Seth, and Harry. There was 1 daughter born in Alexandria, Bertie, and 2 in New York, Sarah and Miriam. And 1 son was born in New York, Jack. And Alma's description reads that our father Samuel bought a death certificate when he reached 16 in order to leave Russia and escape service in the Russian army. At that time, he, his father, and Grandma's young brother, Philip Powell, made it to France, where they boarded a ship for America. On reaching Ellis Island, they ran into name difficulties and were given the family name of Marrus. Uncle Philip retained his name of Powell, as he already had family in the U.S., and the 3 reached New York. This was in 1890.
I was reminded of that story when I was doing research in the old New York City phone books. Those phone books go back well into the 1800s, and in searching for the earliest listing of the Marrus name in the Manhattan phone book, I came on the name of M.L. Marrus. The story about M.L.'s name was, his first name was Marrus, and his last name was some form of Shostakovsky or some very Middle European name. And when Marrus came over, and he came over before Elias, just how early I don't know, but when he came over, he must have been somewhat bewildered, and when he was questioned in Yiddish as to what his name was, he apparently, and this is a story that my father repeated to me, he apparently kept saying Marrus, Marrus. And I guess the well-intentioned questioner translated Marrus into Marrus, and that's how Marrus Shostakovsky became, in fact, Marrus Marrus. Elias came over and came over with the same name of Marrus, and it's continued.
I presume that Grandpa worked for someone in Grandma's family, and Papa, Samuel, peddled, as was the usual thing. He peddled in the Catskill Mountains. There was a part of the family down south in Alexandria. Their name was Kaplan, spelled K-A-P-L-A-N. So the big family settled there for a short time. Papa, Samuel, went on peddling down in the Bayou country.
We're now in Shreveport, and today is Sunday, the 17th of April.
Yeah.
1994. 1994.
And we are seeing cousins usually.
You're Sam's
That's right.
youngest daughter.
Mm-hmm. That's right. One left. I was born in Alexandria, but lived in Gina and then Monroe, and here for over 60 years.
We bought you this.
Because I didn't have it.
The hats fit good.
This is the family tree.
Yeah.
Each one of these
Very good feature.
is one of the brothers or the sisters. And here you are
Well, I'm sure he did.
Since your dad was the first
Because she
child.
lived in
Here
New
you
York
are
for a while.
with Joe and Lucy. Lucy was married to Paul Rainis.
That's right.
And we're
their
up to
children.
date with their children. Now, we don't have your great-grandchildren there, but this is...
The only ones, they're all married except Joe.
Really?
Just when he's in California.
But how about that? All from Elias and Yetta, this whole group of people. Isn't that
Do you know I never knew either one of them? Y'all come on in, I'll give you something cool or hot or whatever.
In our search for family history in Louisiana, we were fascinated by the many references to members of the Marrus family that we found in the book 411, A History of the Jews in Rapides Parish. First ad in the newspaper Town Talk of Ginsburg and Marrus appeared in November 1891.
Business scene, the partners, Ginsburg and Marrus, were still together and were dry goods jobbers.
For the next 60 days, we will give to the people of Rapides and surrounding country the benefit of special New York prices. Sell everything in our line in proportion, which is now in our house for examination. The above prices are specialties in goods purchased from the best houses in New York.
Did you read in that book that your grandfather, somebody was murdered?
Was stabbed, yes.
And he and another man went to investigate.
Yes, wasn't that interesting? This thought is fatally stabbed. Messrs. S. Reuben and E. Marrus of Alexandria left this morning for Oakdale to give him what assistance they can.
Somebody had told me this too, that your grandmother baked bread for the army to kind of make ends meet after they were left. And then when they sent money to them, it was like the sound of music. They walked over the Ural Mountains. The older ones carried the little ones. They walked over the Ural Mountains to get out.
Everybody go.
I think there should be a plaque. There's a plaque on this side which says donated by the Marrus family.
America, land that I love, stand beside her and guide her through the night with the light from above. From the mountains to the valleys, to the white with snow. God bless America, my home sweet home. God bless America, my home sweet home.
Ginsburg and Marrus, dealers in dry goods, boots, shoes, hats, and notions, doing business opposite the City Hall, have decided to make a surrender for the benefit of creditors. Liability, $7,571. Assets, $4,385. The entire stock was purchased by H. Levinson and D. Kaplan for $1,574.
The only story that I have from my father of his stay in Alexandria was when he was apparently on a mule, and the mule got startled by something and started to run down the levee. And Grandpa yelled out, "I'll give anybody a gold piece who catches that mule?
Well, he told me that the first job he had down in the South, he was rolling cigars. That I remember he told me about.
The first girl of 10 children was born to Mr. and Mrs. E. Marrus.
Also, the business partnership of D. Kaplan and Ike Marrus was dissolved, the latter retiring.
I remember my grandfather. I can't say that I knew a lot.
He means Uncle Ike, my father.
Now, to me, my grandfather was Ike. Yeah. Okay, like President Eisenhower, the famous "I like Ike." Well, we used to say "we like Ike." Ike was a very personable, very loving. I remember Ike probably better than I do any of my other grandparents. I remember he was in the cigar business, if I recall.
Yes.
Didn't he have something to do?
That's right.
Yeah, I think he had something to do with...
He was in with my mother's brother, who was also a Marrus, Isidore Marrus. And they were in business together, in the cigar business. My father more or less sold the cigars, and my uncle... my uncle Isidore used to make them. They used to and right down on Fulton Street. Oh, that's even before your time, Sidney.
I didn't smoke at that time. I was too young.
All the brothers smoked cigars, right?
Well, but at that time,
many of them.
No, not today anymore.
There was a big industry in that time. At that time, handmade cigars, which was a skilled profession, and that's what he did. And I remember my grandfather quite well. He was a very, very nice, fun-loving person.
Well, after my father went out of the cigar business, he did go into the coat and apron supply business with my father and my sister, who is quite sick now, Evelyn, who isn't here. Her husband, he's dead. And my father went into the coat and apron supply business with them. And Uncle Seth, who was, yes, he really used to supply them all with whatever they needed.
It wasn't too long after that when he had a stroke.
Then when he had a stroke and they gave up their business.
The others went back up east, where they all managed to make money or work for the members of the family who were having success. I don't know how Papa met Mama, but he had quit peddling by then and was evidently saving his money. They were married and moved to Shreveport, Louisiana, where I was born on January 27th, 1902. They had married in March of 1901. Papa was working at the time for Morris Groner.
That's when they got married. He was 27, I think, when they were married, and your mother was 20.
I doubt if he knew any English when he came. The only education Papa had was he was studying to be a rabbi over there.
He was.
Mm-hmm. He just would say repeatedly that nothing could be, the communists could never be as bad as the Tsars. Grandpa said nothing could ever be as bad as the Tsars.
Did he speak really good English, or?
Oh, yes.
Because Mother remembers that he had an accent, a European accent, I guess.
But, you know, I thought he had very good command of the language.
Right.
He used to tease me all the time when I was a little girl, because if I wanted ketchup, he'd say, well, are you behind? What, are you going to catch up?
I'm not sure if my father went into high school or not, but I do know that even in grammar school, he became part of a club called the Stevensons. And I think that was based on Robert Louis Stevenson. And there were at the time perhaps a group of 10 men, 12 men, and I tell you that the Stevenson group endured throughout my father's lifetime, and it was a very interesting experience. It was almost, in effect, a second family. I would guess they would be once or twice a year en famille with wives and children, and the other time the men would get together and play poker. My sister and I were raised. We had a college education, there was never a question, and we went to private schools, and every effort was made to provide whatever was necessary.
He didn't have very much time to go to school, never did. And he used to sit at the desk practicing writing and reading. My son, he's a PhD now, and he's a very important guy in the country and in the world in certain work that he does. And all my kids have at least 2 degrees.
The Marrus brothers, corner of 8th and Lee Streets, were going out of business, but Harry Marrus, who was associated with his brother Sam in the dry goods business, was to open a store for him.
Initially, your father and Sam, Harry and Sam, were in business together. Originally.
That's right.
And then, why did they, and then what happened?
They was together when they was on Lee Street.
That's the paper.
Yeah.
And
they were on Lee Street, in Alexandria.
And that was where there was mostly prominent black people in, you see.
Yes.
And then when they decided to leave that part of town, my dad started working, getting a little store in Pineville of his own.
Which was across the river. Yeah.
His father,
Pineville is across the river.
Yes, right.
I was afraid, excuse me, I was afraid that he wouldn't remember. His daddy, there was a big Bohemian settlement.
Oh, yeah, I've heard told that.
Have you? And he spoke all these languages, so he spoke their language. And
you mean Harry did? Yeah.
He just had all the business, you know.
So then they left Lee Street to go to Pineville.
To Pineville and Gina.
And Gina.
That's right.
But why did they leave Lee Street?
Pastures were greener.
Well,
Do you think so?
They weren't happy with the business they was doing down there, and it was all black anyway.
So their clientele was mainly black?
On Lee Street.
On Lee Street.
That's right.
So at that point in time, they decided to go their own way.
I'll tell you what better that took, Judy.
Yeah.
When my uncle first moved to Gina, we went to the movies. He was in the open air, and we sat on benches.
Really?
Yeah, no building at all.
You
just
did
a screen.
It sat on benches in the movies.
Oh, yeah.
Movie pictures.
When I was real little, we were in Gina.
What was it like being the only Jewish family in the town?
It was fine. Papa was the mayor.
How did he get to be the mayor?
I guess they elected him. And he brought electricity. They had no electricity. He brought electricity and
Really?
improvements. He was well liked.
And how long did he serve as the mayor?
I don't really know. You got to look
So were you an important family then, because you were the mayor's family?
We got along with everybody.
Yeah.
And I think we moved to Monroe because Papa was afraid we would have no Jewish friends. And Hildred was a teenager. I was converted in Monroe.
In Monroe.
Mm-hmm. Not that I knew what it was all about.
Even though your father was studying to be a rabbi, you didn't know too
No,
much.
Papa never said anything about any of that. And he never tried to make us overly religious. You know, he was not strict with us about that.
When you were growing up, though, were you sort of told that you should marry somebody in your own faith, that you should marry a Jewish...
Well, now, Papa did, that's one thing he didn't want me to do, was to go out with boys who were not Jewish. Now, that was one thing that he did insist on.
Did he put his foot down
and
and
it was
say...
embarrassing for me, you know, because we lived in Monroe and I was in high school, and these boys would ask you, and you liked them and they liked you, and you couldn't tell them why you couldn't go out with them.
Right.
So, but anyway.
Did he back off on that, or...
No, he was strict. That was one thing he was strict about.
Do you think that
He really
because your
was.
father was so strict about religion that you sort of got turned off on religion as a result
No,
of it?
I'm not turned off on religion. I am very reformed, but I am a devout Jew.
You are?
I really am. But I believe in Reformed Judaism. And I think you can be a good Jew, Jewish, and not even go to temple if you follow the teachings,
The precepts.
of Judaism.
At that time in Alexandria, how many Jewish families do you think there were?
In Alexandria?
Yeah.
Oh, I'd venture to say there was right around 100, I'm sure. In fact, there used to be Jewish people come up from Oakdale, from Marksville, and other places within an area of maybe 20 to 35 miles away, see.
Didn't you tell me also that your parents gave land for a cemetery?
They didn't give land. They gave the dirt. When my daddy bought that store that he got killed in, there was a big hill there, and he had to cut out that to make room for his store. And the temple said they needed some dirt that they would pay. He didn't want to charge him for the dirt, but the temple can pay for the hauling of it, see, to have it moved. Hell, when the time came to pay that, they wouldn't pay nothing. He had to pay for the hauling and everything. Strong, was it?
It says from grandmother to Alvin.
Uh-huh.
This is the Bible.
It's in two
volumes.
2 volumes, uh-huh.
And Alvin got this from Grandma, I guess on the occasion of his confirmation.
This was your confirmation class from...
That's right, and that was when I was not quite 14 years old.
And you're on the far right.
Let's see, which one, Alvin, you're all the way over
on the far right.
She was the most unusual woman. First place, you know, she was very religious in her own way, but she never bothered anybody else.
And every Friday night, all the men came over. It was Shabbos, and Grandma never said a word, but they all came over and they sat around. And then when they wanted to smoke, they went outside and walked over to the elevator, and they stood there and they smoked their cigarette or their cigar or their pipe, and then they went back inside. And on Saturday, the women and the children came over to see Grandma.
At that time, Bertha was married to a Canadian, and she came up to see Louis and mostly Bertha, but she stayed with my mother and father because at that time Mother kept a kosher house, and she could eat at home at our place. But I remember when we had a big party at the King Edward Hotel in Toronto, and it was a dinner for the whole clan that there was in the time. And Grandma sat at the, I remember, it was my birthday. And the first thing that was happening, the hotels had little fellas going around paging, or maybe you don't remember that. Well, there was a page walking through this dining room, paging me all the time, 7 years old. So Grandma sat at the head of the table, said they brought her a plate and fruit, all oranges, not open, nothing. That's what she ate.
What did the rest of the family eat?
Mostly steaks. But those were the high days. There were other days after time, and things changed. Things changed.
Daughter was born to Mr. and Mrs. B. Marrus on November 6, 1910.
Born on the 14th of May, 1911, was a fine baby girl, Marion, to Mr. and Mrs. Harry Marrus.
A daughter born to Mr. and Mrs. S.S. Marrus on Wednesday, July 10, 1912.
It says here that on July 22nd, 1919, you went to the birthday party of one Sybil Simon.
Sybil Simon, yeah. There was an old family there, one of the old families there.
This was in Alexandria.
They were rather wealthy back in those days, too. I mean, they had a big two-story house.
And when J.B. Michel was there, that was Marion's husband to be.
That's right.
Marion was not at the birthday party, it doesn't say.
Yeah, Uncle Sam decided to come up there and buy a home just across the street from where we lived on 3rd Street then. That's where Eugenie remembers her childhood in Alexandria there.
Right.
And it was a much bigger house because he had a bigger family. Uncle Sam had a bigger family.
Because what?
There was 4 people in his family, 4 children.
Right.
Only 2 in mine.
Right. And did you, as a family, get together? Particularly, you'd go across the street and eat with them, or they'd come over and eat with you, or
the children would, play back and forth. That's right.
Right. So for a period of time, you were all very, very close.
Yeah. Well, sure we were.
I do remember though, and I don't know why, when I was desperately ill when I was 6. At the end of the war in 1918. When they had the terrible flu epidemic. I was at your house. Now, why I was there instead of with my family, I don't know. I was scared of the nurse, and I remember bouncing from one bed to the other in your folks' bedroom.
The honor roll of the Jewish Religious School was published in the April 13th Town Talk, and included the following.
Jack was my double first cousin. His daddy and my daddy were brothers, and his mother and my mother were sisters.
And that's probably why the 2 brothers stayed down in Alexandria when the rest of the family went.
I imagine a lot because of the women wanted to stay together.
Did you do fishing and hunting when you were a young boy?
I never did do no hunting. The only hunting I did is when Jack gave me a 410 shotgun that he outgrew, and I used to hunt snakes with it. That's that pellet. I showed you the shell that goes in my pistol, you know?
Yes.
And that's what I used to hunt snakes with. Because when we lived there, we didn't live but a block and a half from Red River, where the levee was, and on the north end up there, there was a bayou, Rapides, a bayou ran up there. There's no commerce, it was just a water, a bayou.
Yeah.
And I used to go up there and find snakes all the time.
Did you ever go fishing with your father?
I did it for a while, pole fishing, but that evidently didn't interest me. I didn't go in to mount anything, and that I did before I left Alexandria. I had a couple of Gentile friends that used to like to hunt, fish mostly, not hunt, but fish, and I'd go with them.
Mm-hmm.
But we was only pole fishing. We wasn't doing any casting or
Right.
fly fishing, nothing like that, until I came up here. And then the reason I got entitled with fly fishing, because Jack, I'd go down and visit with him in Lafayette quite often, and we would go fishing.
Right.
Go bring what you call perch.
And I remember he loved to fish, and he loved to eat fish, and he always said, why would anybody fillet a fish when the sweetest meat is right next to the bone?
Nice.
So to this day, I can't stand it when somebody fillets a fish.
That's funny. That's funny.
He made a lot of money in his time, but then towards the end he was very poor. We were very poor. And I remember it was just when the government started helping older people.
Yes.
And there were people in Monroe that were accepting the money from the government.
Yes.
Papa would not have any of it. He was too proud. No, so the government didn't owe him anything.
Interesting.
But my brother and sister, Alma and Jack, took care of him.
Right.
And Mama. But he would not accept anything from the government. But, well, anyway, he had to take bankruptcy. But he insisted on paying off everybody, even though he took bankruptcy.
Right.
He paid off
All his
every creditor. He and Mama taught us really good morals.
He's buried in Alexandria, or he's buried?
No, he's buried in Monroe.
In Monroe.
Mama and Papa both buried in Monroe.
What are we looking for? Almaheimer. No, Alma. We're looking for one of the Marruses,
We're
aren't we?
looking for Sam. Well, they found it, huh?
Where's that?
1875, December 5th, 1959.
In Pineville, we have a lot of relatives, not Marruses, but a lot of them buried in Pineville.
Yeah.
A lot of relatives. But in here, there's nobody but just Aunt Marie and Uncle Sam. Jack was cremated in Lafayette.
Uh-huh.
And Hilda was cremated in Florida.
Yeah.
And Alma was cremated in New York. So what are you gonna do about it? Huh?
Until they said he was dead.
Well, that's a piece of history.
Yeah. We still got.
We reached the end of the path for Sam.
When I was 4 years old, my mother took me over to visit in New York. I lived in New Jersey. And Grandma lived at that time, they lived in a brownstone house downstairs. And I went in there and I saw a lot of people there. It was Shabbos, and everybody came to see Grandma, you know. And Grandpa was sitting in a special chair that he could lounge in. And he said to me, "Come over here, I want to talk to you." And I didn't know who he really was, but they told me that's Grandpa. And when he says, "You have to go over to him, you must go over." So I went over to him, and he says, "Have you been a good girl?" I said, "Yes, I've been very, very good." So he says, "Then you know what? I'm going to give you a ride." So he put his foot out this way, and he sat me on his foot, and he gave me a ride. And it was only a couple months later that he died.
The death of Mr. E. Marrus, age 56, was reported by the Town Talk. Mr. Marrus, the father of Sam and Harry Marrus of Alexandria, died in New York February 28th. Mr. Marrus had lived in Alexandria about 15 years prior to his death. He left behind a wife and 13 children, 10 boys and 3 girls, all of whom lived in New York with the exception of Sam and Harry.
Barney lived in Brooklyn, so we didn't see him that much. But that we did when we were young, and we were on Southern Boulevard and Howe Avenue all along. In fact, I remember distinctly, he's not here now, Elliot, but I remember, say, as a young girl where we were all so close, they lived near us, and all children were born by midwives then. I went for the midwife, and he was born. I remember that just like today. Funny how you can remember things of years ago, and today you can't remember that.
There are four Elliots, and each brother named, as far as I know, each uncle named the firstborn son Elliot, and the other one was who was named after Grandpa was Elliot Kahn, who married Marcia, and unfortunately he since has passed away.
In 1914, and I was the first, therefore, for my, after my grandfather, Elliot. And now everybody's Elliot, as you can see here.
There were 5 Elliots. There are pictures of us at various get-togethers. And the only one that was the one that objected was Elliot H. And he changed his name to Rick. He didn't want to be known as Elliot.
She was really a very, very beautiful woman. Beautiful in and out, what can I say? And I always said that I want to pattern myself like her. That is the truth. As children, we used to have the most wonderful times. We were always there with Grandma. And all the family were together. And then I remember when everybody moved when we moved to the Bronx, everybody moved to the Bronx. All the brothers and the sisters. The sisters weren't married at the time because we were all young children.
Do you remember her?
Very slightly. The only time that I can remember is during this winter. My daddy went up to do some buying. I'd say I was about 8 or 9.
And the whole family stayed in Grandma's apartment. What was it like? I mean, was it...
Oh, very homey. If I'm not mistaken, either I my sister got locked in the bathroom, and didn't know how to get out. And our kids can fool with locks.
Yeah.
Right.
And somebody had to climb through a window.
Really?
It stayed in mind because he got scolded, you know what I mean? For
And she was scolding him.
Yeah.
Interesting. Was she a well-dressed woman? You remember anything about her?
Very stately type of person, yeah.
She was.
Really was. I mean, not strictly Jewish, but I don't know, better composed, I'd say.
Right.
You know what I mean? Better composed.
And I remember distinctly Grandma living on the corner of 163rd and Southern Boulevard in a brand new building at that time, which was a 14-story building. It was one of the first buildings that had an elevator. At that time, you had to get out, you had to close the elevator door, in other words, in order for someone else to use it. And I used to go there on Saturday afternoon, which was only about a half a block away. And I remember she was a wonderful baker. And she used to give me sugar cookies, and I never forgot it. And the other thing I remember is when she lived there, is that Uncle Dave and Uncle Jack lived with her, and they bought her the first radios that came out with the big earphones, where you had to put your ear up against it to listen. And after that, they moved up to, I moved to Brooklyn with my family, and I think Grandma moved up to Washington Heights.
The strongest remembrance I have is the unquestioned weekly visit to Grandma. Every Sunday, we were packed into a car and driven out to Far Rockaway, because at that point in time, Grandma was in her advancing years and lived with Sarah and Mo and Margie and Leona. And if there's any single element of my father's behavior that I remember vividly to this day, it's his absolute unquestioned sense of respect and regard for his mother. And that was a legendary aspect of apparently present in all the children. I had heard that even from the earliest years, it was quite customary for all the family, even as it got to be larger, to go to Grandma's. Even when she was in the Bronx or wherever she lived, everybody went there and she received, and she was apparently a very gracious and a very warm woman, and encouraged her grandchildren and of course her children to be about her all the time.
Most of the family lived right around within 2 or 3 blocks of Grandma. And the first thing the wives had to get used to was the fact that when their husbands got off the subway, before they went home to their wives and supper, they stopped to see how Mama was.
If she wanted us to wear something unusual at an affair, she was an unusual woman. She always used to see to it that we should buy, that my father should buy it, that it should be right. Oh, I had some wonderful times with Grandma, and I remember her distinctly.
Every time we went to New York, and we did fairly often, we went to see Grandma Marrus. She always give us a little $5 gold piece. You can tell how long ago that was. And, however, she said, this you spend. You don't have to put this in the bank.
Miriam was 5 years older than I was, and we went away to camp. She was a senior, and I was the only one from Canada there, but she made sure that I called her Aunt Miriam because she was a senior there and I was just a nothing.
Miriam and I, being the same age, we went to school together. And many's the time that I used to sleep at the house and everything. So I really remember my childhood being very beautiful.
I remember the store real well because I spent a lot of time there. I can look at that picture and tell you where the shoe department was, where the grocery side was, and the warehouse.
How many people worked in the store?
It was, best I remember, only one lady and a man over in the dry goods side, and on the grocery side, there was only one man and a black porter. That's all. And my dad, of course.
You told me that at one point your father did a lot of trading and one time traded for an old army horse and wagon?
Well, no, he bought it at the auction when they was closing the camp out after the World War.
After the First World War.
First World War, yeah, that's right. When he got the horse, he employed a black boy named Johnson, I believe he was. Yeah, and he was real good.
And what? And you worked with Johnson once in a while?
But he was a young grown man. I guess he must have been in his early 20s.
Right.
And I wasn't but about 10, 12 years old.
So it was kind of like a holiday for you when you rode on the wagon with Johnson?
A pleasure job. You know what I mean? I enjoyed it.
Wait a second.
You're not riding the wagon, that's right.
Yeah.
And I was probably running the horses. He was big friends with the Rapides Bank, who was a family-owned bank owned by the Boltons, you know. And every day they thought of him because they loaned him a lot of money on construction jobs.
Because he was also building houses at the time.
That's right, through there.
So he had a side business where he was doing land development.
That's right.
And houses.
Like I told you, I know he built in Pineville alone. I know in two places. The back of the store, I know he built must have been about 10 or 12 family.
What was it called? Marrus Edition?
Well, there was nothing else, wasn't a street. So they called it Marrus Edition, so people would know where they lived.
So for a while he had his name on the map.
That's right, Marrus Edition.
And where is that today? Is that
I
gone?
haven't sliced down there, I'm sure. They don't tell where it is.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have that picture of the destruction of the store if somebody from here was visiting somebody in Pineville and they got to talking about the tornado. We lived on 3rd Street, and I'd been riding my bicycle.
3rd Street in
Alexandria.
Yeah.
And, of course, the store was in Pineville at that time, across the river.
Right.
And a half a block from my house, it tore houses all to pieces. I was on a bicycle, and I was clinging to, you know, you have these, what kind of iron fences, you know?
Right.
I was clinging to that iron fence there. 400 yards away was the river, Red River. And it went across there, and it bounced all over the place, and it went up there, and then came back down where the store was. That's the only spot it hit. People across the street from the store thought they'd take protection in the store. And one man in particular, I remember that I used to go with his son, got flying glass, cut his ear, completely off.
God, big. So your father then was buried in Alexandria?
Oh yeah, the cemetery there.
Do you remember
in Pineville?
Do you remember the funeral?
Oh yeah, sure I do.
When he died, I was little, and somebody picked me up and showed him to me in the casket in the front bedroom. They had him laid out, and I don't know who picked me up. Somebody picked me up to show him to me.
Yeah.
And I remember him in the casket, but I don't remember him alive.
Of course, we had religious sheets on people that owed things.
Did you?
Hell, they ain't about to pay you.
Really?
Best I can remember the records, we still had $7,000 to $8,000 outstanding on the books, and I bet you we didn't collect 1,500 of it.
Huh.
People just denied that they didn't owe anything.
Right.
Even though we had the records.
Did he keep a pretty good set of records?
Yeah, he had a ledger. Sure did.
And so.
But they said, well, we took care of that. We paid that long time ago.
Right, right.
So you can't. A dead man can't talk, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, hello, Jeannie.
You know,
Interview Jan here with her crawfish hitting.
Okay, so
she's good at
Sure, honey, sure. Yeah. Take one and do
Okay,
one.
demonstration. Let's take this right here. You take the crawfish, pull it apart, and put your finger in the crawfish head. And you take this yellow stuff and you put it in your mouth. And then you take the tail of the crawfish, which has a bait, and you squeeze it and you eat it.
There it is. Yeah, Daddy's dad, Harry, migrated to, once they got it out of the island, he chose to come to the South to perpetuate the clothing business, and he landed in Alexandria, Louisiana, where they have a large constituency of Jewish people, and that's where he started, and unfortunately, Harry was killed in a tornado when Daddy was 13.
Right.
So that was short-lived.
Yeah, but you told me that.
Otherwise, we might have been as wealthy as our Jewish friends from New York.
How many cows did you eat?
5, 10, not enough. These are pretty experienced crawfish eaters.
I'm not.
No?
Yeah, they are. This one particularly, she is a.
Which one?
Jessica is the crawfish eater par
She's
excellence.
the eater.
But particularly crawfish. Go on, Judge Jess.
I don't have any. I'm not seeing none.
Like I said to Ron, this is labor-intensive food.
It is labor-intensive food. You got to work. You don't have to worry about gaining weight with this stuff.
David, show me how you do it. Yeah.
Then we take, I've got to suck the head on that one. And we take, squeeze the tail, pull it out. There you go.
Yeah.
There you go.
Hey, he's very on it.
Right. Ron, walk back there.
We want to thank y'all for coming into Louisiana to visit us.
Enjoyed you so much.
When you coming back?
You sure you're ready for this?
There's plenty more fried chicken and crawfish in Louisiana.
Oh, all right.
So,
Well, you sure did treat us real well.
How about the dressing up?
Oh, that dressing was, that was it.
I'll make you some more if you'll come.
All right.
it happens several times a year. Don't be shy about coming by.
All right.
He was born in Russia. And when the family lived in the South,
Louisiana.
in Louisiana, and he was a relatively young boy. He moved up into New York, as most of the family did. And he was in business with one of his brothers. Indeed,
The Marrus Brothers Clothing?
yeah. And when he had 2 kids, and his brother Henry had kids too, there just wasn't enough in that small thing that they had, clothing business. So my father was paid out with some whatever amount.
I was 4 years old, and this is my mother and my dad and me. And this is the man that my dad's best friend, who was a lawyer. And he was the one that called my dad and suggested that he go to Canada because it was 1914 and there was a war on in Canada. And my father was in the woolen business. My dad made a fortune in the wartime up in Canada in 1914. But he also lost it because they lived very, very well. They found out that things in Canada were very different. And he had to buy a 17-room house with 5 bathrooms, and we had to have an English governess. And anyway, he finally went broke. And he was offered a job in Cleveland, Ohio, and he signed up for 5 years. And so we went to Cleveland when I was 14. And I liked it all right, but my mother hated it, and my dad couldn't wait for the 5 years to be up. And when I went back to Canada, my dad was very fussy about who I could or could not go out with. If he'd say, they allowed me to have beautiful gowns and everything, and they entertained very lavishly in Toronto, because at first there weren't very many Jewish people there. But the few that were there made a lot of money and became very prominent, and it became a close group. So he'd say, who's the boy you're going out with? And I tell him, oh, I know his father. No, you're not going with him. He's not good enough for you.
My dad worked for Uncle Seth, or Seth Marrus, in charge of his factory, running his factory, taking care of the sewing machines. There was a sewing plant making uniforms for the industrial rental people, and he worked there all his life. I worked there I remember working there during the summer months, and at that time we were paid 25 cents an hour, $10 a week. Of course, the Subway was only a nickel, and the delicatessen sandwich was only 25 cents, so you managed to hook it. I worked for Uncle Seth from 1936 to 40, went into the war, came back, and I worked from 45 to 60. And then I left, and I went to another uniform manufacturer.
There was a big clan down here. I was going, at the time we were talking, I was a student in the universities, and especially the law degree. And I used to work in the summertime and get it cost $150 was what I had to pay. And it was tough, but I got it in most of the time. But toward the end, I couldn't get a job. So I spoke to Seth and said, can you give me a job? So he did. And I came down, lived with my grandmother, and worked in his factory, and I worked.
What'd you do?
I made $1,550. That's what I wanted.
Yeah.
And
Well,
a few dollars more.
What did you do there?
I was doing everything, sweeping floors, packing goods, and such the like.
You didn't do the sewing?
No, I didn't. No, I didn't. But anyhow, they were very good to me. But Seth never had anybody who was loafing in that thing, and I couldn't either. Anyhow, it was all right.
So who was living at Grandma's house?
Jack. He had him over in his bed, and I had to sleep there with Jack. And
So Jack was your uncle?
yeah, he wasn't that much older than I.
Right.
I even remember Jack, though. When I was in New York, though, the only time that I can remember was during this winter. My daddy went up to do some buying.
Yes.
And it was snow, in winter. And Jack was missing Hebrew. And Grandma was giving him the devil about it, you know.
Right.
Jack was kind of hard to handle because he was a baby, see.
Right.
And boy, she said, you can't do this, you can't do that. I remember that though about Jack.
Jack was the youngest one, and he and my present husband, my husband, were very good friends. They lived in the same building. And they were friends since they were about 7 or 8 years old. And when my dad brought me from Canada, he would go over to Jack and his friend, and he'd give them each $1, which was a fortune at that time. And he'd say, now look, boys, wherever you go, you have to take her with you. And of course, they didn't want to take me, but they liked having the $1. So they found a better way of having more money. I wasn't very bright, I guess. They took me around the corner, and they said, you've been such a good girl, we're going to buy you what you like best, a pickle. And I said, really? Oh, good. So my uncle went and took a pickle out of the barrel, and it cost 3 cents. And he gave it to me. And I sat there and I ate it in the store. And then he said, okay, we better stop home before we go out. We'll go to the movies, but we'll stop home first. And they lived in the Hunts Point apartments up on the top floor. They had a large apartment, but there was still 3 girls home and 2 boys home that weren't married yet at the time. And then on the way home, the 2 boys said to me, let's get an ice cream cone. So I said, oh, that'd be great. What kid of 7 says no to an ice cream cone? So they bought me an ice cream cone, and by the time we got all the way around the corner, I was sick. So then they got rid of me, and they had more money to spend on going to the movies, and they could see more movies. So later when I grew up, and Jack called me and said, you know, do you remember Eddie? I said, of course, and I remember all the dirty tricks you boys played on me. And he said, well, he's going to call you up. He needs a Jewish girl to go to an affair with all his relatives. And he's going to call you, and don't you dare say no to him. So he called me, and we start going out. And I always told him I married him to get even with him for all the dirty tricks they played on me when I was a little girl.
He was the most wonderful brother to his 3 sisters. Evidently, he promised himself that he would never marry. You know, he didn't marry young, you know. That he would never marry until his 3 sisters would marry. And after his 3 sisters married, then he got married. And I tell you the truth, I never thought my grandmother would get over his death, because he was so wonderful to her. There wasn't a thing that Grandma would have wanted or do or of any kind that he wouldn't do for her.
When Dave said anything, everybody had to do it, because he was the oldest one that was still home. And all the others were married. Dave was home, and Seth was home, and Jack was home, and the 3 girls.
He was a wonderful man. Judy, he was a prince. And I believe he was Grandma's favorite. Everybody agreed to that. He was the gleam in Grandma's eyes. He was a wonderful individual. Loving, caring, and everything else.
Grandma never had to open her mouth and say anything much. She was never left alone. Dave would say to her, Miriam, you stay with Mama tonight. Or Jack, you can't go anyplace. I want you home with Mama tonight. She never asked anything of them, but the worst she would say to them, especially Jack, because he got into all kinds of trouble, was, wait till Dave comes home.
When I was 13 years old, I was going to be bar mitzvahed, and I was going down to, I went downtown, pick up my father, and go on the east side to buy a suit. And before we went downtown on Canal Street, a little past Canal Street, where Uncle Dave and Uncle Ben had a piece goods store. And He told my dad that you're buying one suit, but buy him another, and I'll pay for it. And I never forgot it. And that's 60 years ago.
I literally have two memories of my father. One of the memories of my father is sitting on his shoulder at the Thanksgiving Day parade, Macy Parade in New York City. And I remember that it was a very broad shoulder, but even so it was kind of slippery, and I kept having to juggle for position. The rest of my memories are from photographs, and my father was a heavy-set man in his, I guess, in his late 40s, late 40s, always with a cigar in his mouth. I have some that are very funny. Look at the beach where they looked like, or on a boat ride where they looked like they were all clowning around, and the men had put on the women's clothes and were acting very silly. But I have no recollection of my father as a man of humor. I don't know whether he was serious. I found one love letter from him to my mother just before they obviously got married, and that was really revealing because I didn't remember ever having seen that before. And he talked about them having gone to see the O'Neill play Strange Interlude. And so that's nice. I mean, to know that they had gone to see that and enjoyed it, and because with my theater background, I remember reading Strange Interlude the first time. And that's an interesting connection.
Where's the name of the town?
On the gate out here.
Oh, everyone here is from the same town?
Yes.
Before we translate it. For the accuracy. A man who is the son of the heavens is taken in the spring of his life to the heavens.
Isn't that?
He has fallen to God, leaves to his children with all his heart, and justice does he do all the days of his life. Did he do?
And what does it say for Grandma down below?
We didn't even practice this one. Beloved of spirit, Inva Vitsnua, modest, Nidevet Lev, like heartfelt, heartfast.
Yes.
Tovala, good in everything. Good to everyone. Yeah.
And
Al Kulam Livnei Ora, a light unto her, all her children. Unto everyone.
Right.
And then it gives the date of her death, the 13th of Sivan.
This visit closes the circle of our journey into the family. We've been from here to Louisiana, back here, back to the final resting place of Grandpa and Grandma. And we've had a chance to understand the deep respect and love that they enjoy as recorded at their time of passing.
I really felt that it was a worthwhile effort to put forth. And it's been a very exciting time. I think it's probably a combination of objectives. One is a tangible demonstration of my sense of the values that my father espoused and that he tried so hard to inculcate. Clearly, I think those values of family and interest in family and support of family are very, very important. I wanted very much for my children, for our children, to have a sense of the wholesomeness and the values that are represented in the family. And time goes on, and the boys are almost 30, and it's time that they begin their families, and I want them to know how it has been done and how it should be done. I don't know. It's a phenomenon of age where the richness of these wonderful relationships, maybe when you're too young, you can't sense it. Maybe you don't have the developed taste buds for it. But now when it happens, it's like the most magnificent flavor. It's a marvelous sensation to visit and to revisit with the memories that are evoked by being with all these people.
I must say that the Marrus men have all been wonderful to all the family, even to the nephews and the nieces if they needed to go to college and if their fathers couldn't send them. I can't express the way they were, every one of the brothers.
I just want to say thank you very much, Michael Marrus, for bringing me into this fabulous family. This family is incredible. I can't tell you how many people Michael and I have spoken to today and last night and yesterday, and I haven't met anyone boring yet. Everybody is intelligent, warm, and kind, and an interesting thing is that just about everybody has a wonderful story to tell about one of those 13 children who did something magnanimous. Whether it was the brothers who took care of Barney, or whether it was the sisters who kept the family together with the Hanukkah party, or whether it was Ben who threw that fabulous wedding and brought everybody together after the war. Share with you this tremendous joy in being part of the Marrus family.
What were you wearing, Regina? Do you remember?
No idea.
You don't remember your dress?
No idea. You all might have been at the same time.
I think we must have been.
Yeah, I think we were.
Lucy was with me.
sister.
It's really wonderful.
Seth's daughter, and me.
I'd like to ask Norma Pearlstein to step up to receive the Mrs. O'Leary Award. I have to warn you, when she steps up, she's not going to leave without saying a few words. Make sure she unwraps the gift before she speaks.
But before any of this, a toast to David. All right, I have to open my cap. And wear it? Okay. I have the hat. I have it the wrong way? Oh, excuse me. I don't often wear this kind of a hat. Okay? Okay. We've discussed the answer to the first big question that I've been asked today, which was, whose idea was this anyway?
All family members from all over the United States and from Canada as well. I'm speaking to you tonight because my father, Elliot Marrus, has conceded the floor to me. I really want to speak to you and convey what I think is the feeling that we all have of enormous, inexpressible gratitude to Judy and to David Marrus. Let me add a sense that we have from the moment we came into this room and passed the portraits of Yetta and Elias Marrus. Of course, without Yetta and Elias Marrus, none of us would be here, and that really is something to think about. I mean, just think about it here. But the truth is, and we know this as well, without David and Judy, also none of us would be here. I think it's appropriate to name David Marrus the unofficial Marrus family patriarch. David speaks like a patriarch. He looks like a patriarch. In Canada, we have a sense that if it looks like a duck and if it walks like a duck, it is a duck. And therefore, do you join me? For he's a jolly good fellow, for he's a jolly good fellow, for he's a jolly good fellow, which nobody can deny.
However, while we still have a little drop left in the glass, let's toast each other. Let's toast life ahead, and let's hope that we'll have other such occasions, that we'll all have the same degree of love for each other, and that we'll all have happiness and health for a long time to come.